Murder by Decree is based on characters created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, Inspector Lestrade, but it's not based on any actual work by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It's one of several fictional attempts to have Sherlock Holmes solve the most famous unsolved case of Victorian era, of his era, the Jack the Ripper murders. In the 1960s, there'd been a rather fun, sleazy picture called A Study in Terror with John Neville. A Study in Terror is a whodunit. It's much closer in tone to the Conan Doyle originals. It's got suspects and motives and clues and surprises, and it has a rather nice period feel. It's very much a knockoff Hammer film. It's not made by Hammer, but it has that look. It has, Barbara Windsor plays one of Jack the Ripper's victims, so you kind of get a sense of where that's going for. Murder by Decree is a much more serious picture. It's more serious about Sherlock Holmes, and it's much more serious about Jack the Ripper. It's a true crime movie. It's based on actually a lot of scurrilous, unfounded rumours, but also on some serious historical research that had taken place in the 1970s. If you stay through to the end credits, you'll notice that it's acknowledged that the screenplay by the excellent playwright John Hopkins is based on a book. It's based on a book called The Ripper File by these people, Elwyn Jones and John Lloyd. Now you'll notice that the paperback edition I have here of the Ripper File has another detective on the cover, not Sherlock Holmes. For those of you who were around in the 1960s and 70s, you'll instantly recognise this is Stratford Johns, the actor, playing Inspector Barlow, a character who first appeared in the seminal British police show Z-Cars, and then continued into several other series, Softly, 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 Task Force, Barlow at Large. He was the reigning tough cop of his era. All of those shows, although up and down, were really outstanding. But when they'd almost done as much as they could with the character, Barlow and his sidekick Watt, the sergeant who doggedly stuck by him through several TV series, the BBC made a docudrama called Jack the Ripper. And this book is a tie-in to that. It was a 6-part series in which the frame is that in the present day, Barlow and Watt, between seasons of Softly Softly, are poring over all the evidence of this unsolved crime. Later, they did a follow-up series where they investigated other unsolved crimes, the murder of the princes in the tower and stuff like that. But this was a 6-part major documentary series about Jack the Ripper, which is, since then, there have been so many documentaries and books and exposés and theories, and everybody's got 5 new suspects, and every latest book will try and convince you of something else. And the BBC show did not actually come up with a definitive answer, but it looked at what were the theories at the time. It was the first sort of mainstream advance of the theory that pinned the murders on a man called Sir William Gull, who was the personal physician of Queen Victoria, and who, it has to be said, was completely innocent of the crimes. He was fitted up by a fantasist called Stephen Knight, who invented this whole complicated theory involving the Masons and an illegitimate royal heir and a series of murders to cover up this truth that led to the highest in the land, which is, of course, the plot of Murder by Decree. Later, it's the plot of Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell's graphic novel From Hell, which was then filmed by the Hughes brothers with Johnny Depp as the policeman. The film of From Hell is pretty much a remake of Murder by Decree. It carves out of Moore and Campbell's enormously complicated, challenging work a narrative which coincidentally is exactly the same narrative that we get in Murder by Decree. There was, in the interim, there's a Michael Caine miniseries called Jack the Ripper in 1988 for the centenary of the crimes, which cuts out the Masons, but still says that William Gull did it. He's obviously become the favourite suspect, or was for a while. Others have emerged subsequently. Some surprisingly convincing for this age-old unsolved mystery. What has always struck me about the theory that pins the crimes on an upper-class, knighted, respectable pillar of the Victorian community, the embodiment of Victorian hypocrisy and outward virtue and inward seething sleazy vice, is that we as a culture are doing exactly what the Victorians did when they said Jack the Ripper has got to be a foreigner. Yeah, it's like we because we don't know who he was, because he was never caught, he is who we want him to be. And at the time, the popular press, the public, the establishment wanted Jack the Ripper not to be British. Queen Victoria actually said that whoever did this wasn't British. It's entirely possible he wasn't. Now, what we want Jack the Ripper to be is the Jack the Ripper of Hammer films. It's the bloke in the top hat with a Gladstone bag full of knives, walking through the foggy streets of Whitechapel, preying on Cockney sparrows. It wasn't actually foggy that autumn, so that's a part of the mythology that has come along with that. And I'm impatient with this as an image, although when I wrote a Jack the Ripper story in my novel Anno Dracula, I used exactly that as Jack the Ripper. It was a doctor with a big bag of knives and a top hat. It's sort of inescapable. Because Murder by Decree frames it as a fictional story, as a Sherlock Holmes story, I am much more tolerant of it. It also doesn't use the real name of Sir William Gull, as I say, an entirely innocent man whose legacy to history is unusual. He coined the term anorexia nervosa. He was the physician who first diagnosed an eating disorder you can see why working for the royal family would have led him to that. So he was actually a man who was ahead of his time and a genuinely interesting and valuable person who really didn't deserve to be tagged as the most despised serial killer of all time. But anyway, the character we get in Murder by Decree is called Sir Thomas Spivey, and he's somebody else. And I think we also don't really get much about his motivation or psychology, and he's only half Jack the Ripper. There are two culprits. The other is a coachman called Slade, who actually harks back a bit to previous Jack the Rippers. It's the same name that Laird Cregar has in The Lodger, which is an earlier Jack the Ripper movie. But I think that why this film works for me is I think it's one of the best Sherlock Holmes pictures. The characters of Sherlock Holmes have been around for so long and have been reinvented so many times that it's hard to come up with a fresh angle on it. And currently, in the last couple of years, we've had Robert Downey Jr., Benedict Cumberbatch, Johnny Lee Miller, various other actors, have, even Jeremy Brett, have presented Sherlock Holmes as an emotional basket case, as a psychopath, as a sociopath, as an inadequate, as a savant lunatic. This probably starts with Billy Wilder's wonderful The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, where Robert Stevens plays Sherlock Holmes rather like that. And it's been an attempt, I suppose, to take this character we're all very fond of, but we admit is rather unrealistic. Um, and I feel that there's been a trend in recent popular culture to look at characters like Sherlock Holmes or Batman or Spider-Man, Doctor Who, whatever, and try and make them grim and intense and serious, or to pathologize their characteristics in order to revisit the stories we liked when we were children, but tell ourselves that they were serious and valued. Whereas Murder by Decree doesn't do that with Sherlock Holmes. It takes an approach which maybe recently the Ian McKellen film, Mr. Holmes, did, of making Sherlock Holmes a slightly more politically engaged, more obviously compassionate character. Christopher Plummer, I think, plays one of the great Sherlock Holmeses. He's done it on television in a half-hour pilot based on Silver Blaze that hadn't solved. But he's got the height, he's got the aquiline features, he's got that little trace of wit, and that you sense is somebody who is genuinely brilliant, but also slightly self-regarding and slightly pulls back from it. I think this has some of the best Holmes and Watson scenes ever shown on film. I think that James Mason is one of the great Dr. Watsons. And one of the things I've found problematic in all the recent attempts to do Holmes and Watson is that currently creators seem to think that Holmes and Watson hate each other. That they are locked in a horribly dysfunctional, codependent relationship. This a drug addict and a thrill junkie in the BBC show Sherlock. But what I love about Murder by Decree is it shows us the Holmes and Watson we want, the people who actually are friends. I think that Christopher Plummer manages to make Sherlock Holmes human. He makes it. There's a sequence where Sherlock Holmes cries, which is very unusual in depictions of the character. These days, if you saw Jeremy Brett or Benedict Cumberbatch as Holmes crying, they would be crying out of pity for themselves, for their warped psyche, or for grievances done to their closest friend, usually Dr. Watson, although the circle expands a bit to include Mrs. Hudson sometimes, and sometimes Brother Mycroft, and sometimes not. In Murder by Decree, Sherlock Holmes meets a woman who's been horribly treated, who tells her story, played in a single scene by Geneviève Bujold, completely deserving the special billing she gets. She absolutely knocks it out of the park. And you see Holmes is moved by this. There's a progression from the man who is entirely rational and sees crime as a puzzle to be solved, to the man who is genuinely feeling and angry about the situation. And later on, he has a wonderful sequence where he actually goes up against John Gielgud, playing the Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury. John Gielgud's a previous Sherlock Holmes. He played him on radio. And the back and forth there, I think, is really strong. It's a sense that Sherlock Holmes as a character can be used to do and say lots of interesting things. The current trend of Sherlock in movie and TV is essentially fan fiction, is essentially to engage with his character and the world around him, rather than, as Conan Doyle used him, to have him solve mysteries. Murder by Decree uses Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson to explore a historical setting, a historical mystery, and to give a depiction of Victorian hypocrisy, the callousness and cruelty of the political upper classes. Although it's very tough on the on cynical political radicals as well. There's almost a Joseph Conrad feel to the depiction of Whitechapel that you get in Murder by Decree. It's a film that finds room for Donald Sutherland as a psychic, another real life character, an odd footnote to the Jack the Ripper case, and an array of, I think, really great British character faces. There is a real sense of the squalor and how uncomfortable and cold Victorian London is. The pub sequences are not those kind of knees up with Barbara Windsor you get in A Study in Terror or the Hammer films. They look like genuinely dangerous places to be. It's maybe the film that best gives a sense of what Victorian Whitechapel was like. And Hopkins gives wonderful little tiny grace notes of comedy. The prostitute who's really proud that she's got all her own teeth, and then is absolutely bereft when she realizes one is loose. Is a perfect tiny bit of characterization. These little thumbnail characters that we run into, that give us the whole panoply of Victorian London. I think that there's a strength to this. There's a real sort of a texture. It has, I think, a nice look. Again, not very like other films on comparable subjects. It came out in 1979. It came out around the same time that Time After Time, another Jack the Ripper movie, came out, which was even more fantastical. Neither of those films did particularly well, although they're films that people remember 40 years on. And they keep coming around. It's almost like that some films can be called underrated so often that they're no longer really underrated. It's like there were big hit films of those years that have completely gone by the wayside, that nobody really wants to look. I mean, here we are doing a really nice Blu-ray special edition of this. Whereas I don't think anybody really cares about Kramer versus Kramer, which was like one of the most important films of that era in terms of winning awards and being respected. It's a film about rich people getting divorced. Yeah, we've seen loads of those. But this film about Jack the Ripper is still with us. It's still stuck in our minds. When recently, sadly, Christopher Plummer died, and we all sort of had to cobble together the obituaries and look back on an incredible career. I put his Sherlock Holmes up there with, I think, obviously The Sound of Music. His evil Santa Claus in The Silent Partner is, I think, one of the great evil performances of the 70s. But I think his Holmes is among his best, subtlest screen work, because he takes the role seriously but not solemnly.